The COP21 deal unites 195 of the world's nations in a legally binding agreement aiming, for the very first time in history, to address the problems caused by climate change. Many scientists argue that the agreement is not restrictive enough and global temperatures could rise by 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century if countries do not change the pledges made to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. However, what cannot be denied is that the agreement does lay out the path to achieve that 2 degrees Celsius goal. What are the key elements? The parties agreed to keep global temperatures rise well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times and to endeavour to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which many island states consider to be mandatory for their survival. The parties agreed to limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by human activity to the same levels that trees, soil and oceans can absorb naturally, starting after 2050. Following the INDCs sent by every state to the UNFCCC before the COP, the parties agreed to review each country's contributions to cutting greenhouse gases emissions every 5 years to make sure they are appropriate. Following the idea that MEDCs have played a bigger role than LDCs in releasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, rich countries agreed to help poorer nations by providing what is called climate finance. It represents $100 billion a year by 2020, but that is only the beginning, and the amount should increase by 2025. The key target that led the negotiations was the signature 2 degrees Celsius, seen in pretty much every newspaper around the world throughout the 2 weeks of the COP. If you consider this as the sole objective, then it seems like a success, but it's not that clear. The world's global temperature rise is already at most 1 degree Celsius, and many parties demanded a tougher target of 1.5 degrees. This goal has been kept in the agreement, but is hardly likely to be met considering the promises made by the countries. However, this is the first agreement that lays out a long-term plan for reaching a peak in greenhouse gases emissions as soon as possible. The aim is to ultimately achieve a balance between human greenhouse gases emissions and natural absorption by forests or the oceans before the end of the century. If this is in fact made possible by the states that have signed the deal, it would mean reducing greenhouse gas emissions levels to net zero in a few decades, which, even though feels like an impossible feat, is in line with the scientists' target. To make it simple, the opinions are mixed considering the success of the 21st Conference of Parties. On the one side, an agreement was reached following the talks, which is a feat considering the disparities between the parties' ideas and demands. That in itself, and the colossal mobilization of people throughout the world, are signs that the road is paved toward achieving a target set out to save our planet. But on the other hand, only some elements of the pact will be legally binding, and most of it is not binding at all. Also, the national pledges made by countries to cut emissions are voluntary, which leads to the obvious question: will the countries stay true to their word? If not, there is no real hope to meet the targets set out by the COP. But as analysts point out, Paris is only the beginning of a shift towards a low-carbon world, and there's much more to do. That was my last video concerning this event. Hope to see you in Marrakesh for the next conference.